Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me today. So excited. We are jumping into the book of Job. So I'm reading through chronologically. So that is reading according to when these books were written. So in that timeline, we finished up. Our last video was Genesis chapter 11. Then according to how it was written, chronologically written, it jumps then to Job. So this is the time frame of when the book of Job was written. So excited to go through this. Last year was the first time that the Lord really just sunk the truth of what this book was all about. You know, we read and we're like, oh, we always reference Job when we're going through a hard time, and oh, Job lost so much, Job went through this, Job endured so much, and we always just go take this book in those terms, and just being able to relate when things don't go well, and Job remained faithful to the Lord, and that's what we need to do. But there's so much more to this book. There's so much more. So walking through, hopefully you stay consistent in walking through with this book. I know it can get a little repetitious with, the friend is replying this way, and then another friend replied this way, and then Job's response, and then another friend, and so much of the chapter is back and forth and back and forth. But stick with it and walk this out with me, and it's so beautiful, the message of Job, and what we can gather and just hear the voice of the Lord in what he wants to teach us, and what this book is all about, and how it can really just shape our lives and shape this concept of just so good. Okay, so if you are reading through, if you're sticking with the plan and reading through the Bible in 1 year chronologically, then this is day 4. Day 4 consists of Job chapters 1 through 5. So I'm not going through chapters 1 through 5. We're just going to hit, for this video, we're just going to hit chapter 1. But if you wanted to get a head start, if you were following that plan, and when I tell you to hit pause, if you want to read through chapters 1 through 5, then that will be, you'll be able to complete day 4 in that reading plan if you're doing that. If not, that's fine. If you want to just read chapter 1 and then get back on to discuss, that's cool as well. So either way, let me pray and we'll start this up. Lord, we thank you just for how good you are, how faithful you are, for how patient you are, how you are always pursuing us, how you're always wanting to teach us and wanting to show us so much of who you are. Father, just speak and help us to listen. Help us to be ready for how you want to just pour out and pour into our lives today through this time of just meeting with you. So meet with us. Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so go ahead and hit pause if you haven't, and read through chapter 1, or like I said, you can read 1 through 5 and then just get on my videos and we'll run through this for day 4 if you are reading through according to that plan. All right, so let's jump in. Okay, Job chapter 1. I'm just going to start on verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. So right off the bat, we get this grasp of, oh man, Job is like, he's just a good dude. Like he's a straight up good dude. And that's just throwing out the description. It's so beautiful when God steps in and defines him in that way as well. I always do this. I always get ahead of myself. I just get so excited. Okay, that was verse 1. Moving on to 2. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions also were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. And that man was the greatest of all the men of the east. So, again, this Job is like a pretty big deal. Like it says, he is the greatest of all men. He has so many possessions. He has 10 children. He is just wealthy. He is just so in such a solid, like place. He's just in a really good. He's just got a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I'll just lay it out there. Rich dude, very well off. Okay, then in verse 4, it talks about how his sons and his daughters are going to parties often, where they go and they gather and they have these celebrations and they eat and they drink. And then it says in verse 5, it explains that Job does something continually, that he makes offerings. After these celebrations are done, he makes offerings for his children, thinking, oh, perhaps they sinned or they went against God at these celebrations. And so he was in this continual practice of standing in the gap for his children, of making that just parenting with purpose, pretty much. Like that's what he did. He was always aware. It says, perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually, rising up early in the morning and making these offerings and just taking them and their lives and their souls where they were at to the Lord. So we see that though he is wealthy, he was living this constant awareness that he needed to parent with purpose, that he needed to step in. He needed to step in the gap for his children, and you just see this blameless way of life, this uprightness, and how he was described: blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. Okay, verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it." So here we are, all the men. It's that time where they come and present themselves to God. So they are standing, they are positioning themselves, they are making themselves ready and available for the Lord, presenting them, saying, this is who I am, this is what I've done, and all of this is taking place. Then God and Satan are having this conversation. Satan comes up to the Lord, pretty much stands with him. It says that he presents himself among with the people to the Lord. So he is standing there, and God says, "Dude, where'd you come from?" And he says, "I've been walking around the earth, been going to and fro, roaming about on the earth and walking around, going to and fro, walking around the earth." This word walk is halach, which, if you remember and you've seen the other videos, that is the same word that was used when it described Enoch, and Enoch walked with God. And look, I already lost who else we talked about. Who did that? Who else walked with God? Oh my goodness gracious. Enoch walked with God. And Noah walked with God. I'm so sorry. So both of those men were described as walking with God, and it used the word halach. And remember, we said that means so many different things, so many directions, and going and proceeding and departing and coming and leaving and dying and living, just this manner of life. So that's what was used to describe them in walking with God. Then we see this same word. When God asked Satan what he was doing, that's the same word that's used, that he's walking around the earth. So he is walking back and forth, going in all directions. And we see this beautiful way of describing halach, and we see the meaning in that explained in our walk with the Lord, and he walked with God. Then we see Satan doing this as well, and he's going back and forth all directions. Almost we see this this restlessness, that he is not giving up. He's persistent in trying to find and trying to walk in the pattern of people walking with God, almost like he's trailing them, going and coming with these doors opening and closing, and God directing and redirecting, almost like he's trailing them to wait for them, to wait for us to slip up, to say, okay, this is too hard. Okay, I'm getting worn out. I'm getting burnout. I'm tired. I think I'm just going to take a break from walking with the Lord. And the thing is, if we are walking with God and Satan is walking, that word halach, if he is trailing, then the second that we say, nope, I'm done, or nope, I need a break, or nope, I deserve a rest, or I deserve this or that, or we start thinking about ourselves and we lose sight of walking with the Lord, Satan is right there to snatch us up. He's right there to then speak more and more lives of, oh, you deserve this, oh, you need this, oh, you've done so well, you can take a break, or can you believe God's expecting you to do that, or how, or, oh, here's a little bit of fear and doubt. And it's just so interesting that same word is used, and that's what the enemy is doing, is just trailing and walking, seeing who he can get a hold of, seeing who he can tempt, seeing who he can pull away from the Lord. so important to pick up on that and to be aware that that is what the enemy is doing, that he is walking around to and fro from and on the earth looking for someone, looking for just the tiniest foothold that we give him, the tiniest thing that we say or that we're willing to do, that will go against what God says and how God is trying to pull us closer into himself. So going into verse 8, the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." So we see the same thing mentioned in verse 8 that was mentioned right away in verse 1 that describes Job. And the beautiful thing is that those words that describe Job in verse 1 is because the Lord described Job with those exact words. I love it that that's what the Lord said to Satan. So Satan walking around trying to pull people away from the Lord, and the Lord is so clear with, hey, this is my guy. Like, this is who he is. It's you see this unbelievable amount of almost like faith that the Lord has in Job. You know, have you ever thought of that just seeing God and the enemy having this conversation? And what would the Lord say about you? Like, what would he say about us? Would he have that much faith? Where he's like, you know what, Satan, no matter what you do, if he would say, no matter what you do to Melissa, she's going to stand strong. She is blameless. She's upright. She fears me. She turns away from evil. Like, that's my girl. That's my girl. I got her. So it doesn't matter what you do. Like, would he say that? Would he say that about you? We say that about me. It's like we think, we think so much, oh, we have to have faith in God. But you know what? God is cheering us on. He is seeing the way we live. He knows where our heart is. He knows if we are living upright. He knows if we will be able to stand against what the enemy throws at us. And he would have no problem saying, you know what? Have you considered her? Because she's not going anywhere. She's mine. She's my girl. Like, man, that's good. Man, I want that to be said. I want God to have that much confidence in knowing who I am and knowing that my heart is so tethered with his that I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to be budged. I'm not going to be moved because I am choosing to be connected, to be in my God. So that's so good. That's how I'm choosing to live my life. I want that's where it's at. That's where everything will be found. All of that peace will just come pouring into our lives living that way. So, okay, back to Job. Back to this story. So, so the Lord just throws it out. Then Satan responds in this way when the Lord says, "Have you considered my servant Job? He fears me. He's upright. He's blameless." Then Satan answered the Lord in verse 9. "Does Job fear God for nothing?" So he's saying, really? All of this fear of the Lord, you think that it's just from his heart, the goodness of his heart? He's like, that fear from the Lord, that living for you, God, comes from all of his possessions. Like, he's pretty much saying, we know Job. Everyone knows Job, that he is this wealthy, the greatest man of all the East, it says. So he's like, well, of course he's going to fear you if you've given him all these things. Of course people will seek you if they're blessed, if you give them, all of these comforts in life. And he goes into that. He's saying you have a hedge of protection around him on all sides. You've given him everything. You've blessed him with his work. You've supplied him with all of this cattle, nice home, good land, tons of kids. Like, of course he's going to fear you. Of course. So then in verse 12, we see, "Then the Lord said to Satan, Behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not put forth your hand on him." So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. Now, here's when it gets like, for Job. Verse 13 says, "Now on the day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house." So again, those celebrations, the parties, the get-togethers that Job is always praying and always making offerings for his kids. It says, while they were doing that, in verse 14, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans attacked and took them. They also slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." So bam, the enemy is not wasting any time. Satan is like, I'm on this. I'm going to show God that this man will fall away. He will turn away as soon as I take his stuff. Because we get so attached to stuff, right? We make them our idols. And Satan is like, this guy is no different. He's no different. even though God said there's no one like him. There's no one else like Job. But the enemy is out to prove, he is out to go against the truth of God, of what God says. So God defines us in a certain way. The enemy comes in and does anything and everything he can to make that null and void, to take the truth of God and to throw it in the trash and say, you say there's no one like him. You say he's blameless and upright. I'll show you. I'll show you who he really is. I'll show you how fast I can get him to turn away from the Lord. That's what the enemy does. So right away, a messenger comes and says, okay, the oxen were plowing, the donkeys were out there, they were taken away. They were taken away by enemies, and your servants were killed. Okay, and then it says, while he was still speaking. So while this guy is relaying this information to Job, while he is still speaking, someone else came and says, the fire of God fell from heaven, burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them. Okay, so right away, Job is losing stuff like left and right. Then it says in verse 17, while he was still speaking. Okay, so while this guy is relaying this horrible information to Job, while he was still speaking, another also came and said the Chaldeans formed 3 bands and made a raid on the camels and took them and slew the servants. So we've got the oxen, the donkeys, the sheep, now the camel, and all of the servants either dead or taken, like all at once. Then it's not even done. In verse 18, while he was still speaking, all these verses, while he was still speaking, I mean, it is one after another. You know, when it rains, it pours, and it pours, it is pouring. It is pouring hard. So in verse 18, while he was still speaking, another also came and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house. And it fell on the young people, and they died. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head. And he fell to the ground, and here it is, and worshipped. He worshipped. He fell to the ground and worshipped. This is a sign of mourning in the Old Testament when they tear their robe and they shave their head. It's a sign of mourning. So that's what he's doing. He fell to the ground and he worshipped. And this is what came out of his mouth after losing everything that he had. He lost all 10 of his children in one moment, along with all of his cattle, all of his animals, all of his possessions, everything that was worth money, and all of his servants. Anyone and everyone that he had present in his life died. They were died, and everything that he owned was taken from him. He went from being the wealthiest man in the world, pretty much, to having absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nothing. And this is what he did. He fell and worshipped, and this is what he did. This is what he spoke. Verse 21, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. And going back to the description of who God said Job was, for there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. So when Satan came at him to turn him away from evil, to pull him away from the Lord, Job turned away from that, and he blessed God. He blessed God. He said, you know what? I started with nothing. I gained all this only because God gave it to me. Everything I have. He was fully aware, fully acknowledged that everything he had, everything, kids, any possession, anything, all the people that were in his life, everything he had came from God. And he acknowledged that those things came from God, that he was the one who gave them to him. So God can easily take them away. That's when they were taken, it was God gave, God took them away. God deserved his praise, and that's exactly what Job did. He said, I'm not going to blame God. I'm not going to resent God for this, because God chose to give them to me when he didn't even deserve it, when he wasn't even expecting it, when he didn't earn it. We don't earn anything that we have. We work hard and we receive things, but that's all because of the blessing of God, because God chooses to see our hard work and to bless that. It's not just in our own strength we earn these things. The Lord, everything we have, the Lord gives, and he can take them away at any moment. And Job understood that what was important was not in the things that he had, and he chose to still follow God in and through everything. He chose not to sin. Through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. May we live our lives like that no matter what is taken away from us, no matter what happens in our life, no matter what kind of loss that we endure, may we stay faithful to the Lord, because He has faith in us that we will stand committed. He sees our hearts. He knows the love that we proclaim and have for the Lord. May we stay true. May we keep and continue to trust the Lord through everything in our life, no matter what kind of loss we endure, no matter what pain we experience. May we see the goodness of God. May we choose to trust and follow and continue walking halach with God in the way that He directs, in the way He redirects, in the way He gives, in the way He takes away, in the way He opens a door, in the way He closes a door. May we choose to remain in Him. That's all I got for today. So good. There's so much more in the story of Job. So stick with me, continue walking with me, jump onto my next video, and we will continue in just pulling out this incredible truth, the way that God works and moves and speaks to us. So thank you for joining with me, for walking with me today, and I will see you soon.